If you need a super quick, super easy B-roll technique, stay tuned. Hello world, my name is Matt Spa, and I'm a photographer, videographer, and landlord in Atlanta, Georgia. In today's video, I want to show you a very quick, very easy technique for shooting B-roll that gets great results but requires minimal setup. Camera movement adds a lot to your B-roll, but it takes time. If you're shooting freehand, you've got to practice the moves, you've got to do multiple takes. If you're using a slider or a jib, you've got to get all of that stuff out and set up and sandbagged and everything else. All of that stuff just adds to the time it takes to get your footage. I was recently sent some audio equipment for review, and this was a kit that was brand new on the market, so I wanted to return my review around really quickly, but I had a lot on my schedule. I needed to create an engaging opening sequence as quickly as possible. The technique that I used involves taking whatever it is that you're shooting and setting it up and then doing one of two things. You either do a focus pull where you're moving the viewer's focus from one thing in the frame to another, and if you want to see a more in-depth tutorial on that, my last B-roll tutorial had a whole section on that. The other technique is by basically leaving the camera still and moving the lights. By moving the light, you can create shadows that grow and shrink on whatever your object is. You can allow the highlights to cross over whatever that thing is that you're shooting. When you move a camera, the little micro jitters and any kind of variations in your movement are really noticeable. But when you move a light, it is super forgiving. You can not do a very good job and still get a great shot. Some of the footage was shot using an overhead rig, and if you want to see a video on mine, I'll put a link to it up here. For the rest of it, I didn't even set up a tripod. I literally held the camera in one hand, so you'll see a little bit of camera movement, and then I took the light and just moved it with the other hand. The light that I'm using is an Aperture Amaran F7. It's a great little light, but anything will do for this, anything that you can hold in your hand. Let's take a look at my final sequence, and then we'll look at the shots that I got and the editing that I used to bring it to life. Not too bad for a quick opening sequence. I have to say, it probably took me as long to get everything dusted and set up as to do anything else in the process. Let's jump over into Final Cut Pro now, and I will show you the original footage that I captured and the editing techniques that I used. In Final Cut Pro, I've taken 5 of the probably dozen or so clips that I shot, and I've placed them here on the timeline. It's important for me to mention at this point that the little aperture light is the only light that's moving in these, but there is one additional light. I've got a small ring light over this entire setup that's giving me some ambient light for the scene. Let's take a look at each clip. In the first one, we show the entire kit and the light moves from left to right. In the second, we show some usage and light moves from kind of bottom to top. Third clip, we've got the exact same setup as the first clip, but the camera has moved, and light really just kind of moves from in the scene to out of the scene. For the fourth one, we've got a close-up here, and this is the focus pull. So you can see focus moves from one logo to the other. The final clip is the overhead shot again, but the light here is going to move from bottom to top. And we really start to see movement in those shadows, which is part of what makes this whole technique work. Now let's walk back through here clip by clip, and I'll show you the adjustments that I've made. In the first clip, if I hit Control V on my keyboard, you can see I've got a couple of adjustments. One is a color wheel adjustment, just to get my exposure correct. The second is a transformation. And I'm using keyframes to create a rotation and a zoom as the light moves across. If you're not familiar with keyframes, there are a ton of tutorials out there. If you really want to see me do one, I'll be happy to do it. Just give me a comment down below. The keyframes I have set start with a position that's slightly been adjusted, a rotation of 0, and a scale of 108%. And that just gives me this opening scene in a pleasing composition. If we scroll over and we look at the second set of keyframes, our rotation has changed by 10 degrees, and the scale has changed by 30%. So that gives us that effect. I'm going to grab these and slide them so that they cover my transition, and we'll take a look at the second clip. Control V again, and we have a pair of adjustments. One is color wheels, and if we look, now not only have I made an exposure adjustment, but if I look at the color inspector, you can see I've pulled the highlights way down into this kind of bluish teal area. So we start to get an RGB light type effect. I've added also a transition. First keyframe is 100%. Second keyframe, 125%. So in the second clip, all we do is go blue and scale in a little bit. Again, I'm going to pull those transformation keyframes out to cover my transitions, which, by the way, the first transition I used is called light noise, which just gives a little pop of light as you go across there. The second one that I've used is a 360-degree Gaussian blur, and I'm actually going to use those same two transitions throughout. I'm just going to alternate between the two. Looking at the third clip, Control V, all that's going on this third clip is a color wheel adjustment. And this time, I've taken the highlights and pushed them way out into the pink area. On the fourth clip, we again have only a color wheel adjustment. This time, way out here into the yellow. And this is that focus pull that moves from one to the other. The final clip here is a repeat of the opening clip. But this time, I think I already mentioned the light goes from bottom to top instead of side to side. And there's a number of adjustments that have been made. We've got a color wheel adjustment to get exposure properly done. And then we've got a Gaussian blur that I've added. And this Gaussian blur is going to start right here with a keyframe, and it is at an amount of 0. When we move over to our second keyframe, we've got an amount of 50. All we're doing is taking everything and blurring it out right there. And the reason I'm doing that is that I've added this title. And this is a stock title that comes with Final Cut Pro. It's called Lens Flare, and it just brings in the text on top of that. A couple other things going on here. We have a transformation, and you may have noticed that the type is getting larger. And what I want to happen is for the elements in the background as they fade out to get smaller. So this first keyframe is set at 125%. And then that goes to 100%. The last thing that's happening on here is that you'll notice it's getting darker. So the background is becoming less opaque. And that's all done on this compositing window. This actually has some little sliders in it that just, you pull them to wherever you want that effect to begin, and then it tapers off as it goes down. So that's the last thing there. With transitions in place and a little bit of stock music from Final Cut Pro's library, we have a finished segment. So get out there and shoot some super quick, super easy B-roll footage. Import it into your favorite editor and play around with colors and keyframes. If you practice this now, when the time comes that you need it, you'll have another technique that you can use to keep your customers happy and your viewers engaged. You know the drill. Subscribe and ring my bell and give me a thumbs up. Tell 2 friends, and I'll look forward to seeing all 3 of you in the next one.